So good morning, dear students of class 11 science. Welcome to environmental science class. So we are dealing with the chapter ecology. So what we have done in ecology. So in the last class we have learned about the structure of an ecosystem, where we have learned about the composition of ecosystem, the biotic factor and the biotic factor. In the biotic factors we have learned about the producers, we have learned about consumer. We have got primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Then we have learned about decomposers and parasites. Then we have learned about the food chain and the food web also. And lastly, we have learned about the significance or the difference between bioaccumulation and biomagnification. So in today's class, we will begin with the new topic, that is co-evolution. Okay, so this is a new one. So all of you have heard the word about evolution, right? Where there will be gradual, or let's say a formation of new species. Clear? From the pre-existing one, there will be formation of a new species, which is called evolution, that we have learned, which is mainly slower process, right? Where a new species will come into existence. That was called evolutions. But what they mean by co-evolution? That's the most important thing. What is co-evolutions? So in co-evolutions, we can simply say that one species will influence the evolution of another species. Clear? Where one species will influence the evolution of another species. Okay, so let's go through the definition of co-evolution. The term co-evolution is used to describe, look over here, the term co-evolution is used to describe the cases where two or more species reciprocally affect each other's evolution through the process of natural selection. So kindly note it down. So in co-evolution, all right, one species or more than one species, right, they will influence the evolution of another species, and this particular process of evolution will be under the process of natural selection, where nature will select those changes which are beneficial for the populations, and if those changes are beneficial, then nature will select it and will inherit to the next generation. That is called natural selections. So over here reciprocal means, let's say, in favor. Okay, so one species will favor the evolution of another species, okay, in turn. So one species in turn will favor the evolution of another species. So that's why I'm saying that where one species will influence the evolution of another species, that is called co-evolution. A simple examples we can give of a flower and bee. Okay, we know that mainly the bee used to visit the flower in order to collect the nectar, that we know, but in turn the bee is also helping the flower in the process of pollination. And that's why I'm saying that there are lots of flowers which are dependent on bee for the process of pollination. And if bee becomes extinct, then those flowers which are dependent on only bee for pollination will also become extinct. So this is one of the example of co-evolution. Example between a plant and an insect that will help in the process of pollination. So bee will collect the nectar from the flower, but at the same time it will also help in the process of pollination, because the pollen grain will be attached to the body surface of the bee, and when the bee used to visit from one flower to another flower, it is helping in pollination. Clear? So co-evolution means the reciprocal process where one individuals will influence the evolution of another species. Okay, so co-evolution usually occurs when in the course of adapting to the environment. All right, when the organisms are trying to adapt to the environment, where they are trying to adjust to the environment, co-evolution generally occurs, and at that time two or more organisms evolve together. One thing we can say between the host and the parasites also, the hosts are trying to develop different types of different defense mechanism, where they are trying to remove the parasites from the body. Clear? But at the same times, the parasites are also evolving so that they can stick within the or inside the body of the host. So in both the cases, the parasites and the host are evolving together. It's also an example of co-evolution. Okay, so in an effort to adapt, the two organisms which are evolving together. Okay, so in an effort to adapt together, these two organisms, they make use of each other, right? They are using each other, and this can lead to the occurrence of different types of relationship. And these adaptations also bring changes, all right, such that the descendant or those who are evolving are better suited to the environment. That means the offsprings which are produced will have better chances of surviving to the environment than that of their parents. Okay, let's say depending on the environmental conditions, they can tolerate higher degree of temperature as compared to their parents. Clear? So, in case of coevolutions, we can say that the two organisms or more than two organisms, they tend to evolve together. All right, where during this process they are using each other, they are influencing each other in terms of their adaptations. Clear? So coevolutions is likely to happen when different species have different ecological interactions with one another, and these interactions include predator or prey, because we know that we have got interaction between the prey and the predator, or we have got the parasite on the host. These are the interactions, all right. Or we have got the conditions like competitive species, where the two organisms will compete with one another for food and space, or where the two organisms will live together, all right, in close association with each other, where both of them will be mutually benefited, which is called mutual elastic species. Okay, so these are the types of interactions which will lead to the process of co-evolution. So remember, interactions like predator and prey, parasite and host. Okay, then we have got competitive species, where there will be competition between the two organisms for food and space, and mutualistic interactions or relationship, where the two organisms will be mutually benefited from one another. Okay, so these are the types of interactions which will lead to the process of co-evolutions. Now I'll give one example of co-evolutions by taking the example of Central American acacia species. Okay, now we have got the Central American acacia species which have hollow thorns and the pores at the leaves. Okay, and it secrete nectar. Okay, the hollow thorns are also the sites for the end. That means in the hollow thorns we'll find certain ends. So you can see over here in the given figure. So you can see the hollow thorns over here, and you can see the ends over here. These are the ends which are present on the hollow thorns of acacia species. Okay, now these ants usually collect the nectar from those acacia. Now what happens is that the ants will not only collect the nectar from the acacia, but in turn it's also providing certain favor to the plant. So let's see the advantage or the favor that is being provided by the ant to the plant acacia. So ants are not just taking the advantage of the plants. Look over here. So ants are not just taking the advantage of the plant, they also defend their acacia plant against herbivores. So can you see over here the advantage of coevolutions? Acacia plant is providing nectar to the ant. Look over here. Acacia plant is providing nectar to the ant. That means ants are collecting the nectar. But not only that, ants are collecting the nectar from this plant, but in turn, it's also providing defense to the plant against the herbivore. So both of these species, the ant and the acacia, they are evolving together, and this is simply the product of co-evolution, where both these species are evolving together. Okay, so there are different type of examples of co-evolutions. I just mentioned about the example of bee and the flowers, right, where bee are collecting the nectar from the flower, and in turn it's also helping in pollination. Okay, I've given example of parasites and the host also. Okay, then this one example of acacia and the end. So acacia has got the hollow thorns and the pores and their leaves which secrete the nectar. So ants are present on these hollow thorns which will collect the nectar, but in turn these ants are also providing defense mechanism to the plant against the herbivore. So these are the different examples of co-evolution. Okay, now next one. topic, habitat and the niche. So what do you mean by habitat and what do you mean by niche? Clear? So let's go to the definition of habitat and the definition of niche. So habitat is an ecological area. So kindly go through the definition and note it down. And habitat is an ecological area in which a particular species of plants, animals, or any other type of organisms is commonly found. Okay, so in a particular habitat, we will find different species of plant, different species of animals, or any other organisms. So we can say that it is the natural environment in which the organism lives or in which the species lives. So in any places, in any area, if we find a particular organism, a particular species, then that area becomes the habitat of that organisms. Clear? So habitat means a place where the organisms usually live. Simple term. Okay, the place where the organism lives, where the organism survives is known as the habitat. But what do you mean by niche? Okay, so niche describes how an organism or population responds to the distribution of resources and competitors. Look very carefully. A niche describes how an organisms or population respond to the distribution of resources and the competitors. So many generally we can say that in a particular habitat, the natural resource will be limited in number. That is very true. All right, we don't have abundant number of resources, or we can say food and space. So we have got a limited supply of food and limited supply of space in a particular habitat. That is called distribution of resources in terms of food and the space. Now, depending on these particular resources, depending on the availability of food and resources, the organisms which are living in a particular habitat, they will compete with one another. All right, there will be competition between the species, between the organisms for the food and the space. So those responses with the organisms or the species are showing towards the resources, distribution of resources, and the competition that occurs between them for this food and the shelter or for the resources forms the niche. So we can say that in ecology, niche can be defined as a role played by the organism within the nature. All right, so all the interaction between species and the variety of abiotic factor help to define the niche of the organism. Yeah, because we are saying that in ecosystem there will be interaction between the biotic component and the abiotic component along with their environment. Okay, so in ecology, niche can be defined as the role played by the organisms within the nature, and mainly the interaction between the species and the variety of abiotic factor will determine the niche of the organism. So habitat means a place where the organism lives, and the niche means the response, okay, of an organism or of a species toward distribution of resources. That means the food and the species, which will lead to the competition, and competition can be between the species. All right, it can be intra or inter, it can occur among the species or between the species also. Okay, and these interactions will probably determine the niche of an organism. Next one, Gauss exclusion principle. Now what is Gauss exclusion principle? So kindly write this one. Okay, when two closely related species with similar needs, listen very carefully, when two closely related species, so when the two organisms or when the two species, they are closely related, all right, and if both the species have got similar needs, okay, have similar feeding habitat, all right, or have similar space for shelter in the same environment, then they use different food sources or become active at different periods to occupy different niches. So what we're saying is that when two closely related species, all right, when they have got the similar needs for the food and the shelter, then what they do, they will select different food, all right, or their foraging activity will be different. All right, let's say out of the two species, one can usually become active at the morning time and the other species will become active during the night time, so their activity time will be different. so that they can occupy the different niche. Why? So that there will be no competition. So if the two species are closely related with similar needs, then what they do, listen, both of them has to be in the same environmental condition, in the same habitat. So at that time, in order to avoid competitions, because in an ecosystem, in a habitat, resources are limited, they are not unlimited. It's very important. Okay, the resources are not unlimited, it is limited. So there will be competition between the species, clear? And in that case, one will become dominant, clear? So one will win the competitions and the one who will lose the competitions will be eliminated. Okay, so according to Gauss exclusion principles, when the two closely related species which are occurring in the same habitat, within the same environment, with the same similar needs, they will try to prevent competition among each other. So how can they prevent competition among each other? By having different food sources, all right, or by having the different time of activity. So I've told you that one can become active during the morning time and the other can become active during the night time. Okay, so if there will be competition, if the competition occurs between the two species, then in that case, one will win the competitions. That is true. The one who is fit will win the competitions, and another one who is unfit will lose the competitions and will be eliminated. This is the Gauss exclusion principle. So kindly note this one. Okay, the definition of Gauss exclusion principles. So according to the book, it says that Gauss principle says that when two species compete for the same critical resources within an environment, one of them will eventually outcompete and displace the other. Okay, same thing. When the two species we are closely related, we have got similar needs, all right, and who mainly compete for the same resources, then in that case one will eventually win the competitions and will displace the other. That means the one will lose the competitions will be eliminated. Okay, so kindly copy this one. All right, this can also be written down, so kindly note this one also. Okay, this is the Gauss exclusion principle, so write it down. Now those species which are eliminated or those who are displaced, they can become locally extinct. So that means from that particular habitat they can be extinct. Okay, so this extinction can occur due to migration, means to move from one place to another place. They can move from one habitat to another habitat, or due to death also it can become extinct, or it may adapt to a sufficiently distinct niches, to a different niche within the environment, so that it continues to coexist independently or non-competitively with the displacing species. Okay, so competing related species often evolve distinguishing character in area where they can both coexist together. Okay, so the one who wins the competitions is fit one and it will dominate the habitat, but the one who is eliminated, all right, who has lost the competitions, it will become extinct locally. And there are different reasons for the extinctions. It can be due to the death also, or it can migrate from one habitat to another habitat also, or that displaced species can develop certain characteristics so that it can go and occupy a certain niche within the same environment, all right, so that it can usually avoid the competition, so it can lead a life non-competitively, or it will or it will develop other certain characteristics so that it can coexist independently or together with the competitive one. So Gauss exclusion principles, kindly write down this one. Clear? Okay, now next one, we'll go through the resource partitioning. That means we are trying to divide the resources, the food and space within the species. Resource means simply food and the space. Clear? So partitioning means to divide. So we are trying to divide the food and space within the species, which is called resource partitioning. Because due to the resources only, there will be competition among the species. Okay? Because I'm telling you, I'm saying you again that the resources are limited in nature. It is not unlimited. If these resources was unlimited, then there will be no competition for food and shelter or for food and space. But since in nature these resources are limited, then there will be competition among the species. Clear? So let's say that in nature resources is often a scarce commodity. It's always limited in number. Okay, so species dependent on the same resources may compete fiercely for it. So since these resources are limited in number in nature, so there will be competition among the species for these resources. And in order to avoid this competition between the species may partition the resources. They may divide the food, they may divide the space in an environment. Okay, and those resource partitioning is mainly of three types. Clear? We are saying that in order to avoid the competition between the species may partition the resources, okay, based on behavior and based on morphological features. So that's why we have got three types of resource partitioning where the species are trying to avoid the competition among each other. So number one is temporal partitioning, number two is spatial partitioning, and number three is morphological differentiation. So these are the three types of resource partitioning that occurs between these species in order to avoid competition between them. Okay, so first one, let's go through the temporal partitioning. Now what does temporal partitioning means? Okay, so temporal partitioning is when the competing species avoid direct confrontation by using the resources at different times of the day. That means the species will use the resources. All right. Suppose let's say in an environment we have got two species which are feeding on the same resources, but they are trying to avoid the competition by feeding or by using those resources at the different time interval of the day. I told you that one species can become active during the morning and the other species can become active during the night. So these are the different times of the day where the species are becoming active in order to avoid competitions. Clear? So I'll switch over here. One species of spiny mouse, all right, may feed on certain insect during the day. So you can see over here. That means one species of spiny mouse is feeding on the insect during which time? During the day. All right. And the other hand, all right, the another species will feed on the insect during the night. So here you can see the timing of activeness of the species is usually different. So one species is becoming active during morning or during the daytime, we can say, and another species is becoming active during the night. So this usually occurs on a daily basis. Clear? So here, in order to avoid competition, the activeness of the species is usually different. Okay, so they are becoming active at the different times of the day. Then you got another example of a seasonal scale where you have got two species of frog which may breed in such a way that the first set of tadpoles may graduate to different food sources before the onset of second tadpoles. Clear? So thereby reducing competition for the food. Again, I'm saying that in a seasonal scales, we have got the example of a frog which will breed in such a way that the first set of tadpole will graduate to different food source. So out of the two frog sources which will usually give birth to tadpole, then the first set of tadpole will usually move to the different food sets before the onset of second tadpole. So over here they are partitioning their food resources. They have got different sources of food. Okay, and they have done this in order to avoid competition. If both the set of tadpole will compete for the same food resources, then obviously the superior one will win the competition. Clear? But in order to avoid that competitions, the first set of tadpole will gradually move towards the different source of food before the onset of second set of tadpoles. So they are trying this to reduce the competition for the resources. So temporal partitioning means we have got the different time of the day where the switch become active, It occurs on a daily basis or on a seasonal basis. Clear? Next one, we have got spatial partitioning, where the two species competing use the same resources by occupying different area or habitat. Okay, so here what you have seen is that habitat means a place where the organisms will live, right? So what they do over here, in spatial partitioning, the two competing species using the same resources, all right, may use the same resources. Listen carefully. The two competing species may use the same resources. They will use the same food, they will use the same space, but they will occupy a different area or a different habitat. Clear? Example: two species of fish. All right, two species of fish feeding at different depth in a lake, or two species of monkey feeding on the same fruit in the different parts of the forest. So here you can say that both the species are competing for the same space or for the same resources, for the same food or for the same shelter. But what they are doing is that they are feeding at a different depth, right, in a different area. For example, fish in a lake or in a pond, it will fit on a different depth or in a different area. Or the monkey that is feeding on the same fruit will feed on the fruit but in the different parts of the forest, not on the same tree. All right, not on the same tree, but they can fit on the other tree which are present on the other parts of the forest. So by this way they will try to avoid competition among each other. Clear? So here they are trying to avoid competition by occupying different area or by occupying different habitat. So go through examples: the fishes in a pond or in a lake usually feeding a different depth in order to avoid competitions, or the monkey feeding on the same fruit in different parts of the forest. Next one is morphological differentiation. So let's see how does the organisms will try to avoid competitions in case of morphological differentiation. Okay, so it happens when the two competing species evolve differently such that they can use the resource in different way. So here's very just one, you can say that morphology means the body form, okay, the external appearance of an organisms. So if the two competing species, all right, if they will evolve differently, then in that case they will use the resource in a different way. Now since the two species are different, are morphologically different, so the way they will feed on the resources will be also different. So in morphological differentiation, the two competing species will evolve differently such that they will also use the resources in the different ways. For example, let's talk about the length of the proboscis. You know what is proboscis? Right, where they by the use of which the insect, let's say the mosquitoes or the bees, used to gradually grab the nectar. Bee used to grab the or collect the nectar from the flower, and the mosquitoes used to suck the blood from the body of the host. Okay, so the different length of the proboscis of two competing species will decide on which flower it will fit on. So depending on the length of the proboscis, because we are saying that in morphological differentiations, the two species which are evolving together will evolve differently and they can use the resources in different way. So depending on the length of the proboscis, may it be short or may it be long, the feeding habitat of those species will be different. Okay, so let's see that if the nectar in a flower are located deep, all right, are located deep inside, that in that case the long length proboscis will be helpful in order to collect the nectar from the deep inside the flower. If the nectars are superficial or they are very close to the flowers, or very near, okay, so or in case let's say a very superficial layer, then in that case the one with the short proboscis will be there to collect the nectar, because they are not able to collect the nectar from the deep inside the flower. Okay, so depending on the length of the proboscis also, the species can usually decide on which flowers to feed, from which flowers they can collect the nectar. So by evolving different proboscis length, several species of bee can coexist in the same habitat. So depending on the length of the proboscis also, different species of bee, we can say that, can coexist together within the same habitat or within the same environment, and this is all due to the resource partitioning. So here we have finished about resource partitioning, where the species will try to avoid competition by partitioning the resources, where we have learned about the temporal partitioning, the spatial partitioning, and the morphological differentiation. So in today's class, what we have learned so far, we have learned about habitat and niche, right? We have learned about coevolutions. We have gone through a few examples of coevolutions. Then we have learned about Gauss exclusion principles, and lastly we have learned about research partitioning. So this much for today's class. So in the next class we'll learn about interdependence of species. Thank you.